Welcome back to another episode of
Just
a
a
Squirrel
squirrel
Looking
looking
for a
for a
Nut,
nut,
trying
trying
to
to
get
get
out
out
of
of
this
this rut. We did it perfectly. Okay, time to cancel the show. First of all, before we do anything, I want to say hi to Kenny. It is good to have you back in the house tonight, and thank you for being here on time and saying hello. Sometimes I'm trying to remember, Kenny, exactly how we met you. It just seems sort of random, like you just appeared out of nowhere. And that goes as to the question at the heart of today's episode, which is how much of life is random. Kenny, did you feel like meeting us was random? And are you glad for this randomness? I'm glad for the randomness. I'm glad to have you and Melody and the Kims and Lucretia and all the other folks at Richard Marks that have come and been on part of this show. And Oleg, it wasn't quite random meeting you, but if I were walking down the street and I saw you, or I was in the airport and there you were, would you consider that random?
I think, maybe to a degree.
Kenny, don't take it that way. Don't at all. I'm glad you randomly appeared in my life. Or if it wasn't random, I want to figure out how it happened.
Maybe to a degree, and it's an interesting question for, I think, a couple reasons. First is I was actually thinking about the encounter that you and I had, Scott, however long it's been, a year and a half, or maybe even pushing on to 2 years.
Yeah.
But I wonder if part of the reason why it doesn't seem to be random is because we chose to give it meaning. We chose to pair that experience with something that is memorable and something that we can recall over time. And that's where I think there is probably a significant transition between what's random and what's not random. So is there an element of randomness to life? In my opinion, there may be. I think what makes some things not random is the meaning that I choose to attach to them. I think random events happen every day. In fact, really think about this, you, Scott, as well as anyone else that's listening. How many different encounters do you go through on a daily basis? People that you pass, conversations you overhear, animals that you come across, on your drives, whether if you're driving a car or in your case, if you're riding a bike, the number of things that you pass, how many of those things are just random encounters and how many of those are not random solely because of the fact that you choose to assign meaning to those events?
It is pretty amazing because when we think about the sheer number of random encounters, there are those that stand out, like meeting Kenny, and those that do just sort of pass by. And what I don't understand is why, though, do we choose to ascribe meaning to some and no meaning to others? And what would happen if we decided to try and ascribe meaning to everything? Now, I don't know that really would be possible. If I'm riding by on the Hudson River Parkway of New York City on my bicycle and someone just passes me by, it's hard to really ascribe meaning to that. Unless they're really good looking, then it means a lot. But outside of that, it is very difficult to ascribe meaning. Now, more transactional things, then there are things that are a little bit more metaphysical. I'm going to tell you something that happened this week. Every morning I go for a walk, and it is about an hour long, and I go through
Central Park?
Sometimes through Central Park, sometimes I walk down to Times Square, sometimes I walk up to Harlem, and I just take all different routes and see all different streets and see all different things. And the other morning I was walking in Midtown, and there was a corpse lying there on the sidewalk, and there was a police officer on each side, and it was just a man lying there dead on the sidewalk, his body being guarded, I guess, by the police until someone came to pick it up. And it was random. It was one of those things where I just happened to be walking down the street at the time, very shortly after that man passed away, and his body hadn't begun to decompose yet. And the police were there, like I said, just watching it. And it had a real big impact. It was surreal. There was his eyes were still sort of open as he lay there, and his mouth was kind of open. He had a cane, and that was sort of by the side where apparently he just fallen on the street dead. And like, well, what meaning did I give that? I can't get it out of my mind. Some of it's because it's such a startling, bizarre sight. And I've seen a lot of shit here in New York. I've seen a lot of things here in New York City, excuse my language.
Mm-hmm.
But that was novel, even for me.
Mm-hmm.
And meaning, maybe life literally can end. Maybe that the police will be there and guard your corpse so it's not desecrated by rats or dogs walking around. All of these sorts of things, I can't help but wonder. Kenny says it's not random. And he even tracks how he knew who I am.
Well, I also think that going back to your example, Scott, I think if anything, what I choose to take away from situations like that and how I choose to try and understand what's random and what's not is in moments like the one that you just described. I can't say I've seen similar things like that, but I have seen similar things that might be along the current path that I'm in life. So what I'm trying to get to is I think at the end of the day, in my opinion, it all boils down to your belief system. So if you believe that life is teaching you constantly every step of the way, then maybe coming across a moment such as the one that you described could be an opportunity to look at life as something that is not given. It could end at any given moment. It could end in a way that you don't expect it to end, as well as a variety of the reasons. So I think if anything, what I choose to take away from moments like that, and for me, I don't believe there are many things that are random anymore. I don't believe in coincidences, but that's solely because I have had a number of experiences within my life that have helped me see the meaning behind a lot of these events. They've helped me understand that there is no coincidence that you and I met. It's not a coincidence that Kenny chooses to show up, and Jessica and Melody and so many other people. So I think if anything, I personally have a more difficult time trying to understand what is about this life random and what are the things that you just choose to pursue and further create. I mean, maybe the number of opportunities are endless. The opportunity that you described, that could be an opportunity for someone to view life through a different lens. Going on the bike ride through Central Park could be an opportunity to observe life in a different way. So that I used to in previous chapters of my life look at some of these events as quote unquote random, and I solely couldn't believe. And I think the reason why I chose to accept them as random is because I had a difficult time believing in the fact that such thing could actually be possible. The fact that it could be possible to meet someone who is on a similar path of growth or discovery or similar mindset. I mean, think about, I don't know if you can relate to this, Scott or Kenny, but think about your time when you met David. Did you think that was random at first? I mean, how could you? I know for me, some of the relationships I've been in, I would look at some of the, actually all the people that I've had a relationship with, and initially I would question, how could this random encounter happen? And how could it be so perfect in the moment? And then over time, I started to realize that maybe it was one of those situations where it was meant to be. I don't know who decides that. I don't know what determines it. But if anything, I think it's going back to how I started. I think it goes back to the outlook that I personally have developed for life. I believe that life is working with me. And as Michael Singer had said, life's way can be your way if you make it that way.
Kenny asked if there's anything I want to rebut, probably referring to the fact that I took a randomly long time to respond to his connection invitation. I don't think that was random. I think I probably was forgetting to look at my invitations, which I'm occasionally known to do. And I will not rebut that another beloved friend of this show, Jessica Dugas, is in the house. And Jessica, today we're talking about how much of life is random. And I think that the argument against apparently random events having meaning is that they're not empirically provable. We can't demonstrate through empirical data, through repeatable, observable, testable, evidence-based techniques that random things have meaning. And if we did, then we would, by virtue of the fact that we were able to do that, demonstrate that they probably weren't random.
Yeah.
Now,
And the same is true vice versa with intentionality. I mean, there is no data that proves what is intentional for one and not intentional for the other.
Well, it goes as just though something I would love to ask anyone on this show, including you, Oleg,
Mm-hmm.
which is that to the extent you believe that the world, that what exists in the world really is something that is repeatable, testable, or otherwise overtly tangible and
Mm-hmm.
observable by anybody.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's interesting that you actually bring that up, because I was having a conversation like this, and I mentioned to you his name, BJ Miller, who talks about different elements of what we're talking about today. And one of the components, which is actually something that Jessica brought up as well, in this concept of control. I think that in me assuming that life is not random, I'm also making the assumption that I can control certain components of life, that I can create meaning of all of these events. The challenge, I think, of all of that is given any event, any event can have multiple meanings. So the example that you brought up when you were walking by a person who was passing this morning, think about the number of meanings that you can create from that one given situation. And would that set of meanings be different if, let's say, you were in a different state? What if you were processing a loss or grieving or excitement? How would that impact the type of meaning that you choose to articulate from that given set of circumstances? So I think, if anything, I somewhat agree with Jessica. I think part of me doesn't want to have level of control when it comes to controlling life in general and how it happens. But at the same time, I think that there is a level of control that I choose to have in order to maintain kind of, my presence and identity. Like, I'm not going to scream on the show. I'm not going to throw anything at you or Jessica or Kenny or anyone
In
else.
front of the camera, that is.
So that's a level of control that I'll exercise. But I think, if anything else, maybe to a degree, control is also an illusion.
Do you feel, A, I was going to ask you that, B, that it's not that you are, maybe it's not even that you are finding meaning or assigning meaning or meanings as you think you choose. How do you know you're not uncovering meaning?
That is a great question. I guess the best way that I could answer that initially is, I don't think you truly ever know 100%. I think, if anything, it boils down to a series of choices, and the choices that you make in wanting a certain thing to stand for something else, or wanting to understand something in a particular way. So I think, if anything, how I understand this part of life is, when it comes to the elements of randomness of it, the only reason why they're not random is because of a choice that I make in wanting to look at that event or a person or whatever it might be through a particular lens. But at the same time, going back to, I think, an earlier point that I might have made or you have made, is every one of those events can have multiple meanings. And depending on whatever the lens that you're looking at it right now, it could be different from the lens that you look at it tomorrow.
But how do you know that? Because if that had multiple meanings, right, and you're only assigning one or a limited number of meanings to them, how do you know that it has multiple meanings at all? How do you know that's not just you saying later, well, there could have been other meanings, I just chose not to assign them at that minute?
Well, that might
you
be
didn't
true
even
as
think
well.
of them.
That might also be true. So I guess what I'm saying is that everything's relative. There really is no ultimate meaning to anything, maybe.
Do you believe in prophecy?
No, I don't, and that's solely because I don't understand it well enough to even understand what to believe in. Do you?
I don't know. Sometimes I think I do. Do you believe that? Do you believe that our future is? Look, I guess what I'm really asking is, to what extent do you really think you have control over the future? Because to what extent do we even really have control over what we're thinking? We
Yeah.
always say we have control over thinking, but let's face it, it has to occur to us to control our thinking in the first place, which
Yeah.
means in some way or another, we had to have a thought that probably was not within our control to control our thinking. We don't have thoughts to control our
Well
thinking
said.
when we're 2 years old and soiling our diapers.
I mean, we don't even have the capacity to control those thoughts when we're in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Think about the number of times when you blew up over something that is actually a big deal or something that's completely irrelevant.
Oh, it's
Like
always
a dirty
something
dish in the
irrelevant and
sink.
small when I blow up.
A dirty dish in a sink, or like crumbs on the floor. I mean, is that
Exactly.
really is
No.
that really going to change the outcome of your life and whether or not you live or die in that moment? I mean, yes, theoretically you could slip over the breadcrumbs and, I don't know, hit your head on the dish in the sink or whatever. Like, but I think what I'm trying to get to, and once again referencing that some of the conversations I had this week, I think it's a natural desire to want to continue to create many of these things because I think we live in a futuristic culture. I think being in the moment, at least for me, and I don't know how it is for you, Scott, it's a challenge. So the fact that I can't even control that all the time, it just raises another question, and that is, what can I control at the end of the day?
Yeah.
I mean, we can't even, like, break it down this way. You and I cannot control the thing that gives us the ability to have this conversation right now, or one of the elements, and that's the ability to breathe.
Yeah.
You have no idea when the next one's going to come.
Yeah.
You certainly don't control the process of how it enters your body and everything processes through, and then
Yeah.
your heart just keeps on going and all. So
Yeah.
it just brings up another point as far as what can you control at the end of the day. And I've kind of gone through all these different theories. Some people have said, well, you can control the way that you react, but that's not even 100% accurate, because there are times when you react, and in fact, I know I do this, and I don't know if you do it or Jessica or anyone else, but can you recall a time when you reacted in a certain way and then you literally reflect upon that conversation and you tell yourself, I wish I had not done that?
Of course, all the time.
So is that really you being able to exercise control?
Yeah, or at least failing to exercise something that I theoretically have as a possible mental exercise that I can engage in. I do want to digress for a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yes, of course.
And that is on the issue of control and randomness. So Jessica mentions in passing that we chose her spirit animal, the squirrel, as the avatar for our show, and that is why she is here every week. And I love that. I love that we chose your spirit animal. I am curious, just as an aside, by the way, because we've never discussed this, and this gives us a chance to do it. And Kenny, I want you in here too. Oleg, Kenny totally agrees with you. Kenny, you're in the conversation, so you've got to answer this too. A, Jessica, why is the squirrel your spirit animal? I'm quite curious about that. B, Oleg, do you have a spirit animal? And if so, what is it and why? And Kenny, do you have a spirit animal or an avatar animal? And what is that animal and why? I just want to know.
So
no one ever answers these questions for me until they just bring them up on their own. Utterly out of my control, like Jessica.
Exactly. Well, don't worry. You'll also be put on the hot seat, and you'll have to answer that question yourself. But I think for me to start off, it's probably a tie between two animals. One of them being the squirrel, and the reason why is because I'm genuinely fascinated with how squirrels are able to go through just day-to-day life and the different abilities that they have that, let's say, other animals like dogs don't necessarily have. Squirrels can literally they can move horizontally and they can move vertically. And they do it probably without any thinking. Dogs, I'm fascinated with dogs. Having a dog or a companion like that has really helped me see life through a different lens. But it's also fascinating because it creates this contrast. Because here's a dog who, let's say, wishes to chase the squirrel or catch the squirrel, but he can only go horizontally. He can't go vertically up the tree. So I think those two in particular stand out right now off the top of my head.
The dog and the squirrel?
Yeah, the dogs especially, because having had Caleb for going on to 5 years, I would say that there has been a tremendous bond that created between the two of us. I think that he understands me in ways that I may not even understand myself. He helps me see different things about myself that I haven't seen before. And it's just a really special connection that happens. And he doesn't speak English. And yet we're still able to communicate in other languages.
Yeah, he doesn't speak it, but they understand it.
Yeah.
So Jessica gave an answer. Kenny, we are waiting on you. I love that movie Up. I didn't see Up 2. And get my ducks in a row. I don't have ducks. I have squirrels, and they're at a rave. Jessica, you always just make me love you. I don't have control over that. It's pure random. I just love you.
What about you? What are your spirit animals?
I don't have a spirit animal, and that's something I resist to the nth degree. I'm part of a personal branding company's ongoing branding exercise, and during that thing they ask, what is your avatar animal, or what is your spirit animal? And I answer that, don't ask me that damn question. I'm tired of that. I went to this awesome thing that you can do. It's an all men's wilderness retreat called the Mankind Project, and one of the things that was supposed to happen during that was that you're supposed to come up with an animal, and I came up with an animal, but it was really just something that I had to say to make him happy. I don't have a spirit animal. It drives me nuts. I always say my avatar is Helios or Sol Invictus. Sol Invictus is the invincible sun. Helios is the god of the sun. That's my avatar, not an animal. I understand people have animal avatars. I've never been able to relate to that. My avatar is a god.
How do you think you've been able to determine that? Like, what about that experience did you choose to assign meaning to? I'm not going to say it's a random thing as far as
that's a good
Greek
question.
mythology, but like, how did you get to that point?
When I was 12 years old, my family took me on a vacation, and my sister, on a vacation to Denver, Colorado. And we went into a bookstore. I love to go into bookstores and shop, especially anywhere besides Topeka, Kansas, where I grew up, because I didn't have anything. And in the bookstore, they had featured this big children's mythology book by these authors called the Delaries. And on the cover, there were like Greek people drawn lithographs of them dancing near a bush, but above it was Helios, the sun. And the minute I saw that, I had to have that book, and I loved it. And I have always, maybe it's the idea symbolically, when I have dreams, when I imagine my future, when I tell metaphors about my life, I am always the radiant sun. It's funny, when I went to India, the most interesting myths that they told there, the stories that I heard, were about the god Surya, who's the sun. And you're right, like there was a little boy that tried to get onto the chariot of the sun, and Surya punched him in the face, and he turned into a monkey and became Hanuman, one of their sort of trickster gods. And so I feel like in that case, for me, a couple of things. First of all, the light radiance that Sol or the Helios brings, the fact that he's always able to cycle over and over. Sol Invictus, the invincible sun. You cannot conquer it. And I can relate to that. And I like the fact that he rises above everything. He sees the world from a bird's eye view. And that's real power. I also like the fact that he actually wasn't one of the Olympians. He predated the Olympians. He was one of the Titans. And I love the Titans. They represent elemental forces. They represent the earliest, most glorious beings through time. And I can really relate to that. Speaking of birds, by the way, bird's eye views, I see that Kenny mentioned an eagle, signifying freedom. Freedom to travel through the skies. Limitless. Kenny, I'm so glad you shared that. That actually was really, and eagles are very stylish and they look good and they have talons. So apparently there were ancient eagles particularly in South America or maybe Australia in prehistoric times, that were big enough and strong enough to take their talons and attack baby children and carry them away, even young children.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that when it comes to assigning meaning to certain things, that those things no longer become random, regardless of what shape or form or event that they show up in? Like, for example, when you think about any of the Greek mythology that you've described today, as well as the variety of other shows, just based on certain things like that, or certain people, let's say, that you encounter, myself or Jessica or anyone else, and then you meet other people like that, do you still look at those things as random, or has the
Wow.
experience proven to you that there's no randomness to that element at all because you have familiarity?
That is what a great question. Thank you so much for asking that. Brilliant. So I would say the following about that. And boy, I bet others have a lot to say about this. There are certain personality types that I do find to come into my life and stay there. And they have been more or less during different parts of my journey. There have been more or less of those particular various different types of people. And at first it does seem random, but they are actually not. I do believe that people, like animals, have the ability to sense things in each other that are beneath the surface. Maybe body language, it may be subtle, like odors or things that we really can't perceive on a conscious level, tics that we might have, or choices that we make about how we present in the world, how we style ourselves, how we walk, all of that sort of thing, that just the brain picks up on, but we're not really aware of it at the top of our mind in this part of the brain. And so I have had people like that come into my life, and I have felt kinship with them because they are like others I felt comfortable with. Now, in some cases, I have felt comfortable with them because they replicated familial behaviors or familial archetypes, people in my family that I've known. And so I felt just automatically comfortable with them. But unfortunately, many of those people were toxic. And so I have had to learn to be discerning, to be aware when that, in fact, I'm generally distrustful of when my comfort level with someone is too quick because they remind me. I need to be careful about what is making me feel comfortable about them. And am I sliding at this point in my life? I feel like, am I sliding back into something, or am I leaning into something? So with you, with Jessica, Kenny, I haven't had the chance to meet you face to face yet, although we've spoken verbally. But I will say with you and Oleg, Jessica, I felt a comfort, but I felt that it's not, you all are not people that I would have felt comfortable with, say, 15 years ago. I wouldn't have had anything against you. I just would have had no sense of ability to relate to you, probably because you didn't fall into any familiar prototypes. And to me, it's a huge sign of progress that I have come to feel instantly comfortable with people like you and Jessica and others that I might not have a long time ago, or I might have dismissed, or I might have had other reactions to, because it says to me I've moved towards a healthier mental place in my life and a place of independence when it comes to social expectations and behavioral expectations from some of the negative things that I grew up with. I also have to be careful. There are some elements of people that I'm attracted to that are positive, but I turn them away because they are associated with people who I viewed as, despite those positive qualities, the positive qualities were brought into such an extent that I didn't respect them. So as an example, there was someone that I know who had just a personality everyone loved. He had really a great personality. And people would always say to me when I was growing up, "Oh, you have so-and-so's personality. You remind us so much of him." It was not Lionel Richie, by the way. And I always took that as a compliment in a way, but then I started to hate it because this person was liked by everyone, but no one respected him. He was a total pushover. He didn't have his own identity. If someone was really strong or domineering, he immediately bent to their will. And I didn't see him as anything that I aspired to.
Mm-hmm.
And so at this point, I have to be careful. For instance, if someone is very, very likable, I have to sit back and say, I might have a reaction to that. And I have to say to myself, well, am I reacting to this because there's something subconscious about them that I'm picking up? Or is it that I associate this likability with someone who's totally different, who had nothing to do with them, whose life and life experiences and narrative and story, as you always talk about, are totally their own. And that just because this person was a total pushover doesn't mean they are. And I interviewed someone for a podcast that I host who was unbelievably likable. I was listening to the recording of that podcast recently, and I was just thinking, this person, what a wonderful personality they have. They light up a room. And it was progress for me that I wasn't thinking, oh, they must be a pushover automatically. I was thinking, this is someone I really could imagine myself developing a friendship with, not automatically just getting into a reactive state. What about you, Oleg?
So I think that I don't think that there are many people that come into my life randomly. I think if anything else, people come into my life because of the intention that I put out there or the energy that I put out there. Now, it's not to say that there are individuals who have opposite energies. Those that don't come into my life. I think it happens in both cases. The thing that it really got me curious, and this is more of a question for you, maybe before I fully respond and actually think upon this response, and that is in thinking about your connection, let's say with Spectrum Designs, right? Which is the sponsor of the shirts that we'll show in a second here. But just thinking about your own experience with the connection that you've had with Patrick, who's the CEO of that organization, how much do you think of that connection was random, and how much do you think of that connection was solely meant for this particular purpose and this particular opportunity? How do you process that?
I tend to think that the fact that we liked each other probably ultimately was there to unspool whatever role that we have in each other's life, including him being or his company being a sponsor of the show, and Jessica, the introduction that I plan on making to you later tonight to Patrick and his company regarding those T-shirts. And so I think that part of the mystery about these is that they unspool over time. And we don't always see immediately what the true purpose of that connection is. A while back, I met someone who his name is Brian. I met him through an intro on LinkedIn, and Brian and I liked each other, and we agreed that we should stay in touch, but there was really no synergy that we could think of. I did some introductions for him that worked out well, and he was just like nice. And then that was that. There was we couldn't figure out anything. And then some things switched in my life, and some new projects emerged. And we randomly got together again. We're just like, oh, we haven't said hi in a while, so let's just do it. So I said, okay, let's do it. And what he brings to the table, what he was doing, happened to literally exactly be what I needed. It really was fell in exactly to a gap. And that that's the sort of thing that you can never empirically prove, going back to an earlier part of the conversation. You can't demonstrate through replicable experiments that sort of thing is going to happen. Yeah. But it did. And I'm with you. I feel like those things can't be explained. And the universe is too complex to always be reduced down to, well, is this phenomenon replicable? I just don't think that. Kenny, we would happily meet you too. And it's never all just about me. Kenny, that's some Beyonce thinking. That ain't Scott Mason. Come on. And Jessica, yes, you're always welcome. And we get giddy. Yes, I can completely relate to that. Oleg, just explain to us, because I'm forgetting now. I'm really not forgetting. I'm just wanting to turn the conversation over to you. Spectrum.
So should we show them the T-shirts first?
Maybe we should have it. Yes. Spectrum,
Wow.
yeah. Spectrum is an amazing company. For those of you who don't know, Spectrum employs an overwhelming majority of his workforce uh,
Hmm.
as people who are on the autistic spectrum. According to its CEO, Patrick Bardsley, the number of people on the autistic spectrum that end up unemployed is close to 90%. They provide real jobs, real opportunity for folks that are on the autistic spectrum. And the work that they have done and the impact that that has had on people's lives, who so often, some of the stories of people there, they've been viewed as throwaway or might not have had anyone see potential in them. And then Spectrum comes in their lives, and before you know it, they're ready to take over the world. And it's a beautiful thing. I went to their factory one time. It was a genuinely moving experience. What they do is they print custom t-shirts for you or your company or your special event, as well as do embroidery on things like baseball hats or jerseys. And they will look beautiful. They will be done in as prompt of a fashion as possible. Their prices are competitive, and they do an absolutely fantastic job. You're helping to make the world better while
Hmm.
actually getting some nice t-shirts or baseball hats or jackets or hoodies or whatever that are designed to your or that are custom printed or custom embroidered to your specifications.
Where can people get the ones that we have for this show?
You need to DM me, and we will talk about exactly how to move forward with those.
Hmm.
They are gold, and you will be seeing Oleg, Casey, Bodie, and I all start wearing them very, very soon. I'm going to wear mine with suspenders, leather ones at that. And if
Are
any of
those
you
for sale as
choose,
well?
not by Spectrum Design, but I can tell you where to get them. All of y'all will look
By
good
Scott
in them if
Mason
you
LLC.
start. Scott Mason LLC. Maybe that should be my next career.
Yeah, or maybe it was just
And
a random thought.
and Jessica says she's going to start wearing them too. Jessica.
But it brings up a really interesting point, and I think this goes back to what you were talking about and what Jessica was mentioning briefly, is that I'm always fascinated by situations such as the one that, let's say, Spectrum, we've been able to create with them in this partnership. I'm fascinated by how you and I started the show. I came across, for those who don't fully know this story, I came across an ad of a person. I want to say his name is Otto, and he posted this ad where the picture was a squirrel, and it's one of those big ads that I'm sure you might have come across, Scott or Jessica or Kenny or anyone else, kind of like, wanted or reward for missing dog or missing cat or whatever it was. And this was during the time of COVID, and the person was looking for a job, and he had a picture of a squirrel, and underneath he had a couple paragraphs about how he lost his job due to COVID and he was looking for new opportunities. And I remember within moments after speaking with him and helping him in different ways to get connected to resources, reaching out to you, Scott, and saying, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
What do you think about starting a show
Yeah.
that is based on this particular theme with these particular topics and a series of discussions? So was that a random thing that was presented to us? And did we not make it random by choosing to assign our own meaning through our own series of choices? Or was there something else that was at hand? Was it some universal force that was helping us figure out ways to stay in touch on a more frequent basis, maybe due to an intention that we might have set internally before that? I mean, you remember that first conversation?
I do. I remember setting all of the conversations we had about this show. I
And
remember setting up a spreadsheet together and
yeah.
talking about it, right? Like, we moved
And
quickly, by the
do you
way.
remember during one of the conversations before starting this show, we were talking about trying to find some ways to collaborate and trying to figure out
Absolutely.
what that synergy is?
Yeah.
So-
that was even way earlier. Yes.
So did we put that out there?
We did. We did.
So I guess, if anything, how do you take meaning from that? Is it the fact that there are thousands, if not millions, of random events, and then whichever one you choose and go with, it it's no longer random. But then it seems like if that's, well, I don't even know how to process that. And this is going back to Jessica's point. I really don't choose to even control this or even know or even claim to know what I'm talking about when it comes to this, because to be honest, I don't. But I think if anything else, it just makes me think that if some of these things have a level of intention behind it, then they really can't be random, can they?
Duncan Leaf, who
Uh-huh.
who's participated in the audience before in the show, actually raised something about this indirectly. It wasn't the bullseye of the conversation that we were having at the time, but he talked about the philosophical concepts of determinism versus hard determinism versus soft determinism. And basically he said that hard determinism is that there's really is nothing random. It's all just planned. We're all basically marionettes acting out roles that we were assigned. And we might have little teeny tiny variations of control, but actually we don't have any control. Then soft determinism is more of what I tend to believe and more of what you're talking about, which is that perhaps there is a general highway, but we choose what lanes we go in. We choose the speed that we're traveling.
The vehicles that we drive.
Exactly. And whether we get off or not, but even if we get off, we still end up just on the service lane as opposed to the main highway.
Right.
And so we think we have choice. The weird thing, though, is that there has been pushing a little bit more deeply into empiricism as having relevance on this topic. There are some studies, and these are disturbing studies if you really think about them, about the brain activity in emergency situations.
Right.
And the brain activity in emergency situations, a lot of times we're acting. An example might be we're on a street about to cross, and then we swerve to avoid an oncoming car. But there have been studies that say that this sort of action our bodies engage in before our brains have the opportunity to perceive that the incoming thing that we would be avoiding or acting in response to, before the brain has a chance to even perceive it. Which really is, when you think about it, that is a relevant to this conversation, but also disturbing thing. Because if that's true and we spread that all out, we really have no control at all.
Yeah.
None. If our brains are if we're acting in response to stimuli that our brains haven't perceived yet, then we really aren't in control. There really is something else going on.
It also reminds me of, have you seen The Adjustment Bureau?
No. Tell me.
It's a movie with Matt Damon, and I don't remember some of the other actors, but it points to a very similar example that you just described, and that is essentially there. I think the entire movie is based on that, but there are a couple scenes within the movie where they slow it down and break it down as far as if this person did not take a sip of this coffee, or if they wouldn't have walked out onto the street at this particular minute, then the taxi would not have driven in front of you and possibly hit you. So it talks about kind of very similar to the butterfly effect, that if one event did not take place the way that it did, then a whole series of events may not have taken place the same exact way. And essentially what this movie is about is that these two people who, quote unquote, were not supposed to meet due to the fact that their destinies aligned on different paths, but yet they met by, I don't know if it was a random encounter or not, and they instantly developed a connection. And so the whole movie is about this. I'll probably just spoil the movie for everyone, but that's all right. The whole movie is about this bureau who essentially tries to separate them because they weren't meant to be on that path. But the premise of that movie and what I'm trying to get to is that when it describes the moments of, for example, if you were to walk out of your apartment right now and go get the mail or go get some coffee, think about how different would that experience be if you left either 5 seconds earlier or 5 seconds later? Would you encounter the same things in front of you? Would you encounter the possibility of being hit by a taxi, being hit by a bicycle, uh, forgetting your keys at home? Or would you encounter a different set of events? So I have no idea where I was going with that, but I think what I was trying to hint at is just that there might be a degree of randomness to it all. But then at the same time, it's like looking at all these events, it just fascinates me how the more that I choose to observe them, the more that I see the connection of how this event might have led to that one. But once again, that could also just me assigning meaning to it all.
So Jessica raises that movie that you indirectly
Spoiler alert.
referenced, The Butterfly Effect, which is a classic Ray Bradbury story as well. And then there's also a movie called Sliding Doors. It's a romantic comedy, but it's basically about that. It's the way lives diverged because a subway door closed, and a woman in one version of it made it through the door and met someone that she loved, and the other one she didn't.
Do you think about life in a similar lens sometimes? Like people that whether it's random people on the street, like I've genuinely become a lot more curious, and that could just be due to my upcoming travel and wanting to learn about other people. But I've noticed myself in the recent years striking conversations that I never did. Coffee shops, barber shops, getting my oil fixed. And I don't know if it's just naturally who I am now.
I think it is.
And
I'll be honest about that. But go ahead and finish. I
find that fascinating. Or I wonder if there's something inside of me that I've trained myself that if I don't speak to this person, therefore I might miss an opportunity for X, Y, and Z. And I don't know I don't know if there's a way to know or not. How do you know if it's one or the other? How do you know if it's like that FOMO, fear of missing out? And how do you know if it's just your genuine interest?
I do think we habituate ourselves to certain behavior that put things out into the world and that eliminate an element of randomness, although it may seem random.
Yeah.
I will use actually, and I would love to know if either of the people who are participating in the audience right now, and anyone watching this later should feel free to comment too. I'll just sort of say some observations about them. So for instance, there is a gentleness and a genuineness when one talks to Jessica. And I would be very shocked if that's not something that Jessica has leaned into.
Yeah, cultivated
and habituated. Kenny has a very broad range of vocal variety. He's very interesting to listen to. When I've heard his voice, he speaks in a way that is very energized. And it would not be surprised if maybe that's partly who he is. It's also, though, I wonder if it's not like, for all I know, I would be very surprised if Kenny would be saying, okay, let me find ways to talk slower and slower and slower and slower. On some level, he's choosing to have this voice style that I love. It's very New York. It really is. And so it's very distinctive, and it's extremely interesting to listen to.
Yeah.
And those are all things that become habituated through practice and our lack of adjusting, and that we may lean into. I love to conduct myself with a certain amount of swagger out in the world. And it made my life, my day, my whole existence when I went to the doctor's office once and one nurse told me, "Are you a rock and roller?" And then another person said, "There's something about you. Are you on television? You need to be on TV." And I was, of course, disappointed to have to tell them no. No. But to me, I obviously am making some sort of choice to habituate characteristics and behaviors that give that impression to people.
Yeah.
And it's not like I was insulted. The whole Lionel Richie thing does insult me. I'm still trying to figure out how to get rid of that. But, we'll have that discussion another day.
But it's also fascinating how you choose to, how I'll speak for myself, but how I choose to take away information and actually choose to create action in my life based on what appear to be random remarks or random encounters, such as the one you just talked about. I've received, I can't say similar, but similar remarks in regard to the concept of, oh, you would look great in this, or you would sound great on that, or you would be a great X, Y, and Z. And so I find that fascinating how some of these events that appear to be random and some of the remarks that appear to be random actually have a lot of truth to it. And if anything, some of those remarks, I know from just my own life, I immediately acted upon, because there's something within my heart that spoke highly to me, and it's almost like the random encounter gave me the necessary permission to just keep going and keep finding that thing.
Desiree Morton is in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Desiree, home girl, you are my niece. I love you. That's not random. It's because you are a beautiful soul. Thank you for those remarks. And Desiree, just so you're fully in on the conversation, what is your spirit animal if you have one, and why? And what are some characteristics about you? I think that you have a flash and sass about you that you've chosen to bring out into the world. I follow you on Instagram, as you know. I'm watching you. I'm watching you. And that comes through. And I love that. That's not random.
Do you or anyone else that's listening, do you ever use the words in the screen randomly, or do you only use them with intention?
Both.
Both?
I try and be intentional about it, but you're on screen enough, especially a regular show like this, and you start to relax, and you may occasionally say things that are, I don't know if they're totally random. I would say that they may be other sides of yourself that you might normally be a little bit more guarded about. And I think that random, sometimes I will say, though, I do say things random. You joked about it one time. You said, Scott, sometimes you just say whatever just appears to pop into your head at any time that I can't figure out what that has to do with anything, but I roll with it. That's a choice that you make. Sometimes I know that I'm just saying whatever is coming to my head and has nothing to do with anything, and I'm just throwing that out there. Where these minds come from, just like I did.
But I also find that fascinating for a couple of reasons. Is first, I think that there are moments throughout the day. So one of the things that truly fascinates me is conversation, and in particular conversation amongst a group of people. The reason why I find it fascinating is because if you really take the time and observe what's being said in the order it's being said in, 99% of the time it truly doesn't make any sense at all whatsoever. I mean, really think about that. How do you start a conversation talking about whatever business to a series of cats or a spirit animal, and then somehow transitioning to you stepping into a puddle in New York City? But somehow it all makes sense and it has its own continued flow. And that, for me, it's fascinating to observe, because I want to be able to have a sense of flow where one thought builds upon the next one, builds upon the next one, builds upon the next one. Logic. But then there are so many components within literally every conversation I've ever been a part of where as soon as I start to observe, I don't get it. How did it go from here to literally talking about the end of the world, and then somehow it comes back and rubs and completes the cycle, so to speak? So that's random, but yet I think many of us probably perceive it as something that's fluid, and that's not random. I mean, really think about it, like your own conversations. I know you have a lot of conversations over the course of a day.
I do.
How many, if you were to observe one of them, what was the logical method, or was it just series of random thoughts that somehow connect to one another?
If I answer that question, I'd give away all my secrets. There's always in my conversation, I won't say anymore. I will say that Desiree's spirit animal is a cat because you never know what a cat's thinking. What I want to know, Desiree, is whether it's a quiet little cat or whether it's a tiger. Now, what I will say is sometimes, not in business conversations, but sometimes, and my husband has noted this about me, I like to say things that are random. Jessica, squirrely nature and randomness are freaking awesome. Jessica, but they are not as awesome as you.
Do you think we're all squirrels? Do you think
I told y'all I ain't a squirrel.
A squirrel
I ain't a squirrel. Stop. Desiree says a tiger, and I'm going to sick Desiree on you if you don't stop talking about me and squirrels.
So you don't have a squirrel brain to you?
I don't have a squirrel brain. No.
You never squirrel out.
Look, you keep trying to get me into a squirrel box. This conversation is going to get squirrely. Are you ever Helios? Are you ever Sol Invictus?
No.
Yeah. And you've got blonde hair and I don't.
Those are random characters to me. Yes. Anyways,
well, anyway, sometimes I will say this, and I'm curious if anyone does it. David, my husband, has noted this about me every now and then. Sometimes I like to just say something random in a conversation, just to jangle things up a little bit. Sometimes I'll say a random thing just to shock. Just to get a reaction. David says I like to take my hand and go bing and zap people on top of the head just to see what they'll do and whip them up and get a reaction. Now, I don't consciously do that, but David insists that I do that. And I will admit sometimes getting shock reactions out of people is pretty damn fun. But I will say, so anyway, that's just one sort of randomness. There can be controlled randomness where I like to bring a little bit of random into the conversation every now and then. By the way, which reminds me, Kleenex don't look good when they're next to Clorox in the grocery store. Anyway, I believe us meeting happened on purpose. Think about it. Squirrels are so much more fun to watch in a group. Jessica, I've never doubted that I didn't meet you for a purpose.
Yeah.
That was obvious from the moment we met.
Yeah, and I think the other component to that, and this might be a component to many of the connections that I have throughout my life, is that sometimes that purpose is either yet to be revealed, or sometimes we may never know the purpose. I had a really another interesting conversation this week, kind of a random thought, but I'll try and connect it to the episode itself. But we're talking about purpose, and in particular, he was discussing this concept that I had asked him the question of, is purpose a necessary component to a meaningful life? And based on his experience, he had said that purpose was not. Now, I know that you have a different perspective on that with everything that you're doing through Purpose Highway and everything.
Yeah.
But I really get curious as far as how much of purpose do we just choose to create, because without a sense of purpose, there's a lack of control, meaning, everything's a lot more random than intentional. And how much of it, is just like is that an experience that I think we as individuals strive to create because it eliminates some of this randomness in life and gives us control over some of the events, or is there something else beyond that?
Jessica says that her purpose saved her life, or connecting to it did.
Yeah.
And that's a powerful, Jessica, I want to just really say, and this is not random at all, I really want to say thank you so much for sharing that. That's, that goes us to the power of purpose. Mm-hmm. I think that I would very respectfully disagree with whomever had that conversation. And I don't care if they are a genius. I don't care if they are the world's expert on purpose. And I'm just little old me sitting in New York City. Yeah. I will say I do not believe that for so much as 1 second. Pointlessness, I do not think is the same as having I do not think a meaningful life is one that is pointless. I don't think anyone realistically says, my life has no point whatsoever. Oh my God, that really gives it meaning. Mm-hmm. Who says that? That's a little bit like saying, not having any hair at all. I get tired of having so much hair. Well, if you don't have any hair, you're not tired of having so much hair. It's ridiculous, with all due respect to that person. Come on. Sometimes people say stuff. I'll tell you, they say stuff, in my opinion, I don't know this person. I don't know who they were. I don't know their name. I don't know anything about them. For all I know, they may try and kill me tomorrow. I don't care. I'll still say it. Sometimes sometimes people just say stuff just to be contrarian or just to have an opinion and just to get out there. I'm guilty of that sometimes too. I don't believe it, and I'll just say it. But in this case, I really do believe it. No, I don't think being pointless gives your life meaning. Sorry.
Yeah.
If anyone
did you randomly just say that, or was there purpose behind it?
I'm responding to what that person said. It was not random. No.
I'm just kidding.
Maybe that person randomly said it just to jangle your chain. Jangle mine too.
Where can people find out more about the purposeful conversations that you do have?
purposehighway.com. We are in the middle of a silent revolution of thought, because the places that people have historically been to where they have connected to find meaning are in decline, and I believe they ain't coming back. And by the way, that's not random. That being said, a new movement for connection to purpose, for ethical foundations, and for spirituality is emerging. And everything that you want to learn about it and find it within yourself is on purposehighway.com. By the way, if I could just do a little plug for something here.
Sure.
If anyone listening, Desiree, Kenny, anyone out there who sees this, and you're ever watching Purpose Highway, you're listening to it, if you're ever in the mood to just do a little selfie of you with a Purpose Highway logo or a scene from Purpose Highway on the screen, I'd love to see that. I am collecting, because it means a lot to me to know that people are impacted by that show. Let me know and send it to me. I'll post it on social media, give you a shout out and a big hug of appreciation, and then keep on journeying.
Yeah. I think it's a great idea to do something like that. Jessica, looks like you're your first participant.
Jessica, I love you.
Huh.
Oleg, you know what?
Yeah.
I love you too. Where can people find out more about you? Yeah, you didn't respond to that. Don't worry. We can have brotherly love. You're like a brother to me, homie. Where can people find about you, and where can they find out how all these cold Oleg conversations occurring?
One place that people can find me is through a channel called Overcoming Odds, and that's an organization that you and I are both a part of, which is really focused on helping people create a narrative that they believe in the story that they choose to live. And Friday, tomorrow morning, we have a weekly series that comes out at 10:45 a.m. Central Time that's hosted through probably all the same platforms that everyone's tuning in right now, where we explore different connection between people's personal narrative and the topics of appreciation, grief, resilience. In fact, I remember the question tomorrow that Steve Gamlin will be joining us to explore
Superstar.
is how can you transition beyond your circumstances, regardless of what those circumstances might be? So that is a place where people can find many of the conversations, the podcast episodes, the events, and different what once upon a time might have been random encounters, and then became something that have given me tremendous meaning in life and purpose, and a sense of purpose as well.
Jessica's Breakthrough Show is another place to find out a lot that can bring meaning to your life. Jessica, I love the theme of this season of your show with the musicians. It's really inspiring. You're doing great work, and your event, you're doing work for Overcoming Odds. And we both, as members of Overcoming Odds, really want to express our appreciation for this. Every bit of support counts, and having the support of a superstar like you is all the better. Yeah.
That's where I think people, someone had said this to me many, many months ago. She said, people need people and people help people. And for me, I don't believe there's any randomness to that. I think
I agree.
I think there's a lot of power. And one other thing that I'll mention quickly is in regard to this concept of people helping people. I think what would help all of us, not only the two of us and Casey and Bodhi, but also people that tune in, so other people can find elements of the show as well, is if people would consider leaving a review on Facebook or LinkedIn or some of these other platforms for this show, because I think it would help spread the message that much more and bring a diversity of thought to these conversations. Not to say we don't have it already. We have a lot of it from the people that show up, but you never know. You never know who needs what in life, and you never know how these conversations might be the things that people need in that given moment.
Exactly. And that goes us to all meaning-based podcasts. Thank you. And Jessica's comes to mind as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think that with that said, it's might be a random note, but I'm just I'm happy that we're able to share this space, and looking forward to meeting you, Scott, in a couple weeks in person.
It's going to be an incredible experience.
Incredibly random encounter
that
will go on, but I'm happy that we're able to do this, and I'm happy that all of this started as quote unquote random things, but we've been able to assign meaning to it over time. And
and Jessica, we will, while we're here, be having a toast to you, to Kenny, to Kim Schultz. We're going to be introducing Oleg to Lucretia, who has been on the who's been a participant in the show and watches it. We're going to
Miller.
AJ, yes, and Adrian, and we're going to be giving a toast to Richard Marks and to Latasha and to all of these folks, Richard Cook, who have shown repeated, Susan Cruz, all of these people that have been there for us, whether they are participating in the live show or coming in later and sharing their feelings, thoughts, and changed perspectives, adding to our own thinking and making the world a little bit better because of the fact that people's lenses, ideas, and hearts have changed. All of them. Getting toasts.
No, we'll definitely do that. And outside of that, I just want to thank everyone that chose to show up today, and we look forward to seeing everyone next Thursday.
Be a tiger.